So I'm taking you along to my local beach this evening so you can see the beautiful place where I live in the UK. And while we're at the beach, we're going to walk, talk and contemplate that darned sheath. I have a lot of questions about the knife sheath, so please bear with me as I go through them with you and some of my theories. So the DNA on the knife sheath that was found next to and slightly underneath Maddie. Now, when this first came out in the PCA, I initially thought how convenient that a knife sheath with a single speck of DNA has been found next to a victim. And I still think how convenient. However, it could have come off the perpetrator and it could be completely as law enforcement is putting it to us. But I have these questions. How did one speck of DNA get onto the snap button? So this suggests to me that the knife sheath was cleaned and a bit was missed. So at what point was the knife sheath cleaned? Did the perpetrator clean the sheath and the knife before entering the building and killing 4 people? If he did clean it before the murders, then I truly believe there would be far more DNA on that sheath than there is. I would then say, did he clean the knife sheath after the murders? Did he stop and go, right, I'm going to clean it all down now so that no one finds my DNA and my fingerprints on it, etc., etc.? That means then he would not have forgotten the sheath. He's not going to clean it down and forget it. So this leaves for me 2 options. One is that the knife and the knife sheath belonged to a victim and they used it to try and defend themselves. The perpetrator got it off them and then stabbed them with it. Could explain perhaps Xana's severed fingers and defence wounds because perhaps she pulled the knife out first to defend herself. That is an option, and that could be why there's less DNA on the sheath than we would think. Still odd to me that it's on the snap button though, so I can't answer the question why there is a single speck on the snap button. I don't get it. Second question is, how did the sheath come off? I have looked up online that sheaths are worn on belts either across the body or around the waist, and the belt feeds through the sheath and is pretty secure. How then did the sheath come off? I find it hard to believe that a perpetrator could carry a knife in a sheath into a crime scene. Awkward for a start. You don't want extra things to carry. What did he do? Draw it like a sword and commence battle? I am puzzling over this whole thing. Maybe you can enlighten me in the comments below. So I've got another part of this that I'd like to discuss, and this is the possibility that Bryan Kohberger was in fact a private driver. Now, we are all talking about whether he was the DoorDash driver, and of course it's a very odd coincidence to me that the DoorDash arrived just before the perpetrator. But what I will say is, if Bryan Kohberger did some private driving, much like the driver who drove Maddie and Kaylee home that night for extra cash, that would answer a lot of questions like why his phone pinged late at night in Moscow. Was he taking people back to WSU? Was he driving them back to their apartments? On this particular night, did he perhaps drive somebody into Moscow or just arrange to pick them up around 3:30 in the King Road area? Perhaps Bryan Kohberger drove around the area and his client was nowhere to be seen. Perhaps there were some messages exchanged. Perhaps law enforcement have seen those messages that say, meet me at 3:30 or 1122 King Road at 3:30. Doesn't exonerate him, does it? Because he could still be really involved in this crime according to law enforcement. But it could have been a client that Bryan was driving. Maybe this client got inside Bryan's car, covered in blood, Bryan sped off, realising now that his car was at that scene and he had a perpetrator in his car with blood in it. Maybe some of Bryan's DNA got on the sheath because he'd given that person a ride before. Maybe he drove him in earlier that night, or maybe it was someone he knew. But who's to say that Bryan hadn't planned to pick someone up innocently from that area? This guy was late, he was driving around, maybe even Bryan parked up at the back and thought, you know what, I'm going to go and see where he is. Someone's just left the property in a car, the party must be over. I'm going to go and have a look. Maybe he went to have a look, walked in, saw what he saw, was horrified and said, it's okay, I'm going to help. Maybe the horrible realisation that his car and the fact he just entered this scene hit him, and he realised that that was going to be incredibly difficult to explain away. Food for thought. I would love to know what you think. I think it's as likely he was a private driver, if not more likely he was a private driver than he was a DoorDash driver. Maybe Bethany knew he was a private driver. Maybe that's the exculpatory evidence. I think there's so much more that's going to come out in this case, but I can't help but feel, and this is speculation only, that Bryan got involved innocently. And I feel that perhaps he knew he had a big problem explaining away how he turned up at the scene and perhaps how he walked into the property and how he got his DNA on that sheath. Love to know what you think. Please leave me your comments. Please like, please subscribe, and I will see you all next time.